Welcome to Soul Connections, a podcast about enchanting relationships with the human, more than human, and divine. I'm Emily, an astrologer, mystic, and herbalist.
I'm Aryn, an astrologer, writer, and creator.
And I'm Dani, a musician, astro minister, and organizer. We're your hosts. Join us for illuminating conversations with radiant guests and Astro Church sermons that weave astrology, mythology, and tarot.
Journey with us as we make meaning out of mystery through archetypes, patterns, and storytelling.
Welcome to another episode of Soul Connections. I'm Emily.
I'm Aryn.
And I'm Dani.
We have another interview segment for you today, and this month our special guest is Parisa. She is an incredible community leader and space holder and healing arts practitioner, and I am so excited for you all to get to know her better today or deepen your relationship with her if you already know about her through all of her amazing community work. So I'll share a little bit about Parisa. Parisa identifies as a queer Iranian American and is the founder of Parisa Yoga Shala. She's a yoga, reiki, and sound healing guide who finds joy in supporting others in exploring their mind, body, and breath through accessible and trauma-informed embodiment practices. Welcome, Parisa.
Thank you, everybody. I'm really excited to be here.
We are so grateful to have you. So Parisa, we always like to start out the interview. Can you share your sun, moon, and rising sign with us?
Sure. So my sun and my rising is Virgo, and I'm a Taurus moon.
Yay, so earthy. I'm super excited. Towards the end of the interview, we will share Parisa's full chart, but she has beautiful earth and water signatures.
Awesome. Welcome, Parisa. Our foundational question for these interviews is, what lights you up?
Yeah, I love this question. I am really passionate about providing safe and accessible spaces for my community to be able to explore themselves in ways that they need to right now.
What are some of your favorite ways to gather community in the present moment? Like, how do you center community in your work?
Yeah, so as a yoga practitioner, I'm able to gather people on a weekly basis. I provide beginner-friendly, trauma-informed classes that are all small group. Everything's curated to the needs of the people who are showing up. And I've had people of all different walks of life, which has been really fun, from college students from down the street who have been able to come to people later in life who are trying to find soothing and supportive spaces to reconnect to their bodies. And so that's been really powerful to be a part of. And then I also provide a lot of curated sound journeys for people throughout the city of Milwaukee. And that is a accessible way for people to experience a meditation practice. And so that's been really profound for me to be able to provide an entryway to meditation that can a lot of times feel really daunting for us. And as a global community, with all the heaviness and the grief and the violence that we see every day within our communities and online and throughout the world, I think it's really important for us to have spaces and techniques and practices for us to sit with ourselves and our emotions. And I'm really grateful that people trust me enough to be able to gather as a community to do that collective work.
Have participated in a few of Parisa's offerings, specifically the meditation circle, and your sound bath healing spaces and offerings. And they really are such just profound, beautiful community healing spaces. And it is just, yeah, a gift to have someone like you in community bringing people together to have these spaces to feel and to heal whatever needs to be felt and healed in that moment. So we are really, really blessed to have people like you in community. And so I'm curious, I know a big kind of central tenet of your work or maybe your philosophy as a guide and healer is trauma-informed care. Can you define that for us? What is trauma-informed care? And then how do you practice that within your offerings?
Yeah, that's a great question. Honestly, I've come to realize that that term can mean different things to different people and their communities. For me, as a practitioner, I'll speak to my own experience. I view trauma informed care as a practitioner as an approach that I take in making sure that appropriate steps are taken to understand the needs of my clients. So I provide intake forms for all students who come to my group sessions. I put really intentional time and research into understanding what their conditions are, especially if someone has previous health concerns, physical trauma to the body, such as serious injuries, mental, emotional trauma that they've been navigating. And I curate all the classes to their needs. So I do the work prior to showing up as a guide. And then during class, I emphasize a lot of agency and autonomy. So I'm always sharing with my students that this is your practice, your journey. You get to decide what happens here today so that they have the reminder that they get to make their own safe decisions for their bodies and their mental capacity that day. And so I always indicate that if you need additional support through this experience, raise your hand and I'll come and help you. And so that's been a really great element of being able to provide one-on-one support, even in group settings, and being present with somebody when they need it. And then after class as well, especially for those who have indicated health concerns of all different kinds, I always make sure that I do check ins with my students and keep that conversation open, especially if they're in a really intense state of grief or processing trauma. I ensure that they are able to keep that relationship open with me. So I find trauma informed care is really like a tenet of it is community building, of like reciprocal care and showing up for each other really intentionally and not having it be transactional. I don't want people to show up in my spaces just for the sake of, to be frank, making money from that exchange, but really this being a intentional exchange of energy. Um, and I share a lot of my teachings and teach in the ways that I do from my own experiences with trauma. As someone who navigates complex PTSD from childhood abuse to being a diasporic woman from Iran, there's just like so many complexities that I carry, and I'm consistently doing research and trainings around so that I can show up for people within areas that I am not well versed in and don't have lived experiences in.
I'm so curious about the way that you emphasize autonomy and agency and how that connects for you to what you're talking about, which is this like individual trauma healing journey, but also the collective or ancestral traumas too that we all carry. Can you talk a little about that, about how the emphasis on agency and autonomy and the trauma informed side of it is associated with your collective work as well?
Yeah. So within my own lived experience as someone who's experienced a lot of trauma, I a lot of times resorted to making myself small, waiting for other people to dictate how I should live my life, the choices that I can and cannot make, how I need to show up in a space. I always relied on there being like a script or somebody dictating that for me, this hierarchy. Um, and within my classes, I very much recognize the the sacredness of a teacher-student relationship. And I view that as a great privilege to be able to hold space for other people. And I try to make it as clear as possible of I'm also learning. I am a part of this journey just alongside you all. I don't have the answers. I'm someone who's hoping to learn alongside my students. And so as we move through classes, depending on what the format of the class is, I provide lots of different options for people. I'll show us shape, for instance, like in a restorative yoga class where you hold a particular shape for a long period of time. I'll share a shape, and then I'll always provide at least 1 to 2 to 3 even alternatives depending on how someone's body wants to settle that day. And then I always emphasize if none of these work for you, feel free to choose something that does. And if you need assistance, please let me know. I'm here to support you. And because my classes are small, I'm able to go, especially people who have chronic pain or physical disabilities and can't move on their own. I'm able to physically help them with consent. I always provide consent cards when it comes to touch, especially, and I'm able to help them shift. And then other layers and other types of yoga classes where it's a little bit more movement based and there's quite a few shapes that we're exploring. Sometimes students will pause me in class and say, does this look right? Is this the right way to be doing this? And for me as a teacher, it's fun to be able to respond in those moments of what do you think? What feels good for you? Does this feel accessible for you? Do you want to try it maybe in a different way? I respond with more open-ended questions so that they have the space to decide for themselves. And that's why I intentionally teach more of the slower formats of yoga, where it's not so quick, fast-paced that it can be overwhelming for people. I've noticed the correlation between anxiety and stress and the unknown of yoga within more fast-paced yoga asana classes. And so over the years, as I've taught, I've actually cut back and no longer teach faster paced yoga classes. All my classes are intentionally for beginners because I've come to realize that feels the most trauma informed to me. So that when I welcome a beginner, I'm truly welcoming them in a space that has space to breathe, to settle, to take the time to really feel out in their bodies what feels good before they're being asked to move to the next thing.
I really appreciate you just like sharing all of that. And also, it's so clear that you are so intentional, even just the kinds of yoga classes you teach. You're already thinking of like what is accessible. I'm curious to hear more about that, what you're sort of helping your students do, which is trust their own bodies and to break down this sort of hierarchy of teacher student where it's a little more leveling and at the same time still like you're embodying your teachings, you're embodying like your professionalism and you're so intentional about the research that you do. You know, you mentioned clients being like, is this right? Like, can you talk more about like what have you noticed your clients or how have you noticed them navigate that space? Like, have you had return clients where you've seen sort of them grow into their comfort and their autonomy and authority? Like, do you have any stories around that in terms of just the impact that kind of practice has on the people coming into your space?
Totally. Yeah, thanks for asking. Honestly, I think I see it the most in my Shavasana. So, for those who may not know, Shavasana is that final part of a class where people are able to find rest and it's their time of stillness and integration. And so, in my classes, I always end with we are now transitioning to our Shavasana. You get to decide what this time looks like for you. And so, when I first started teaching a lot of my classes, I would provide some examples of if you would like to, you could lay on your back and I'll show them how to use props to support their body. If you have low back discomfort, you could do this option, this option, this option. So I would provide options. And now, after 3 years of doing this and having so many regulars and my beginners going through the classes with me, it's remarkable to look out into my class and see every single student has decided a different shape for themselves for Shavasana and are using like 5 different props in like so creative ways. I'm like, damn, this is amazing. Like taking tips like, okay, I need to put this in a shape in my class next time. I've never done that before. And I always have this like huge smile on my face, just watching them rest. Like it's so profound to see people rest because a lot of times resting in public can be really a vulnerable experience. You need to trust yourself, trust the people who are surrounding you, trust the teacher, the space itself. it can be scary. And it's been really profound for me to see the growth in students of how they're able to even curate their time of rest in ways that feels really supportive for their practice. And sometimes I'll say, if you want me to cocoon you in with a blanket, raise your hand. And I have usually like students who shoot their hands up right away, and I get to like nurture them in that way. And it just feels really comforting for me as a teacher to be able to provide that. And as Iranian, we like love to curate experiences and support people really well. And almost all of my family lives in Iran, and I don't get to have that exchange of energy in those ways. And it feels really nice for me to be able to provide that. I feel like connected to my roots and my culture, and it just brings me joy. So I'm really grateful for the ways that my students have been able to trust the process.
Can you talk a little bit about how that individual healing process, because that's, focusing on trauma-informed care, on people healing their individual traumas and also lineage traumas, ancestral traumas that have been passed down, how that is connected to collective healing. Like, how do you weave those two things together?
Yeah, it's been fascinating. So, from my own experience, I left my full time profession in higher education about 3.5 years ago. And I really started focusing on my own personal healing journey when I had hit my rock bottom. Like, it took me a while to get to the point where I was like, I really need to significantly prioritize my own self healing. I had been taking like little steps here and there, but when I had experienced deep depression and my body started to shut down, I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia officially from a physician, which I had been battling with the condition for years, but finally took the steps to acknowledge that for myself. I needed space to breathe. My self healing process was recognizing the demands of capitalism and this constant need to produce, the constant need to be on top of things at all times. I have very much of a perfectionist as a Virgo, very perfectionist mentality. And as a daughter of immigrants whose parents came here by themselves during a very difficult time for Iranians to be in the US, we've just always had a hustle mentality. Like my parents have worked incredibly hard, and that was instilled in my brother and I. And so taking a step back, quitting my job, and just allowing myself to breathe and to process my life and envision a new way of being was very scary, but very much needed for my mental health and my ability to move forward in life. And so going through that journey, I realized that I really need to lean on community. And that's when I found a yoga studio that I started to attend more regularly. I joined yoga teacher training program, which was very much group therapy for me. And so I realized that I was trying to do all these things at home by myself. But once I joined yoga teacher training and realized that other people are also trying to go on these journeys and how powerful it can be for us to collectively process and share resources and tips on things that have worked for them and that hasn't was just really empowering for me of we can do this individually in the ways that we need to, but we can collectively support each other along that process. And so that has been really holistic for me. I needed to see medical professionals to support gut digestive health concerns that I had, to then physical ailments, to mental, emotional stuff with a therapist, talk therapist. And so it's been like holistic around herbalism, like so many things. And so for me now as a teacher, I bring people together for group settings, but I also am consistently sharing resources on other things that have helped me. And so it's really fun for clients to come back and say, hey, I saw so and so person that you referred to, like for instance, a pelvic floor physical therapist that was like pivotal in my own personal journey of getting to know my body in safe ways so that I can communicate that to the people that I love around me too. consensual touch, all those things that a lot of us are working through that I'm able to share with my clients and that they can go through on their own time as well. But we're able to collectively celebrate our wins and lean on each other when things are hard too.
Wow. Parisa, I just feel so much emotion bubbling up hearing you talk more deeply about your stories and even hearing when you were talking about all of the care and intention you pour into your yoga classes to be accessible for your students. And I feel like I was even feeling into like how proud your ancestors are for all of this deep healing work that you're doing. It makes me really emotional because I think that work is just so needed in these times. And so you do all this, right? Like you're so connected in community. You're really weaving individual and collective healing and supporting the individual healing of your clients in collective settings and referring out. I am curious, what roles do joy and pleasure serve in the healing process? Maybe for you on a personal level, but maybe even how you see on a collective level as well.
I think that there's a lot of that weaves in with my sound healing practice in particular. Sound is one of those things that can be really soothing and supportive for folks. And it can be the opposite. It can be really activating and bring a lot of trauma to surface. And so, as I've gone through my sound journey and come to decide for myself what instruments and sounds feels good for me as a practitioner to play and to introduce to my community. I've been able to lean a lot on what brings me joy through music, what brings me pleasure and makes me feel good, because I will never play something for somebody else that doesn't feel safe for me. I think that it's like really important for sound practitioners in particular to be really cognizant of that. And so I'm really careful around consent around my sound experiences, especially getting too close to students. So I have them raise their hand if they consent to me hovering above their bodies, because I know that sometimes for somebody, it feels better and more pleasurable if I'm further away from them and not provoking potential anxiety by being too close to somebody and invading maybe their personal space. And so that's definitely been an area of growth for me. And it's fun for me to be able to even connect with private clients, for instance, for sound. I have an intake form where I say, what do you enjoy? What do you want out of this experience? Are there certain elements and sounds and um, aromas that you really enjoy? Sometimes they have to think about it, like, I don't know, let me take some time and really process that for myself. And it's always an open communication. And even after they submit the intake form, when they come in that day for private sessions, I always check in with them again of, hey, how is your energy feeling now? And what do you think that you'll enjoy the most? And during the session, I always give them an opt out to, if this is not feeling good for you anymore, please raise your hand and we can pause completely or shift the session to be what it needs to. Because I never want somebody to feel like, oh my gosh, I already got myself into this and I can't stop now. Because that doesn't feel good for anybody. And I've been on the other side where I'm like, wow, I don't like this anymore. I don't feel safe anymore. And it can be tough to communicate your needs a lot of times.
Yeah, and I think when you're aware of that and deliberate about knowing that that could happen and addressing it even before it does, that makes people feel safe. And I really liked what you were talking about where joy and pleasure, that's such a relative term and everybody has their own sort of understanding of that, their own preferences, and you even acknowledge sometimes that can shift and change in the moment. I'm curious to hear more about your sound healing journey and or maybe could you like explain what that is, because I think like it's explainable in the name, but what exactly is that practice and like what kind of sounds and instruments are you using, just to give our listeners more of an idea of like what this is.
So, sound journeys can look different depending on the practitioner leading them. For me, I am a practitioner that tries to create really soothing, gentle experiences that are meditative for my clients, that provides them space to rest, to process their emotions, to grieve through these journeys. and a lot of nervous system regulation support. So calming the nervous system, bringing them into the parasympathetic nervous system state so that their bodies aren't in this fight or flight mode, which a lot of us are in consistently with all the complexities of the world that we live in right now. And so I provide a lot of space for people to simply be in my sessions. So how it starts is with breath work, so people can drop into their bodies and sense how they're arriving in the space. And then I start playing really soothing sounds with my instruments. So I have instruments such as chimes and crystal bowls, metal bowls, gongs, a monochord that I recently got, which is a string instrument. And the intention is to support people in settling, and I provide a lot of space of silence in between the instruments so that there's space for it to resonate with the body, for space for the mind to slow down and for people to process. There was one more thing I want to share with that. I'm blanking on it right now. But overall, it's an accessible way for meditation. And so a lot of times people assume that a meditation practice is simply sitting on a cushion and being still the whole time, and that being the extent of what a practice can look like. And sound meditation can be this really great entry point where people are able to set up their props in any way that feels comfortable for them. I do not ask my clients to be still the whole time. Sometimes clients need to shift around and move their bodies, and I totally provide that as an option for folks. But it's been really cool to see people of all different walks of life who have been intimidated by yoga practices, for instance, or even spiritual practices. But sound is a natural opener towards like a potential spiritual journey. It's been really fun to see that accessibility. I will say that sound baths do not need to be on the ground either. I recognize that getting access to being on the floor can be challenging for many. And so I've done seated sessions where people who have been in wheelchairs have been able to participate. So there's definitely an entry point that way too of disability justice work is really important for me. And I'm consistently trying to think of how do I make things more accessible for people who have access challenges to a lot of studio spaces.
Thank you for sharing that with us, Parisa. Yeah, if anyone feels called and pulled to the sound healing journey, specifically with Parisa, I highly encourage. That's your service that I have participated in the most. And I love all of your work, and the sound healing for me is just really, really beautiful. And I'm like, I need to go to another one soon.
Thanks, Emily.
So we've talked about sound healing, and you've been mentioning yoga, and I learn a lot about yoga through you because you're also very vocal on social media about the roots of yoga. And you told us in the conversation we had before this about the roots of yoga. So can you tell us like the roots of yogic philosophy and like also the relationship between yoga and collective liberation?
Yeah. So yoga is this profound, sacred, I don't even know what to say it as, like practice, philosophy, a tool that leads the way when it comes to the intersection of personal healing and collective liberation. And so, yoga itself, the word means to yoke or to union. Yogic philosophy has many different tenets, and one of them is ahimsa, which is the tenet of nonviolence. And this tenet has been used by civil rights activists here in the US in the 60s, where people were able to build collective strength from it. Activists, including Rosa Parks, there's beautiful photos of them practicing yoga, have been able to use yoga and meditation as ways to build resiliency and mental and physical strength to be able to continue to show up, because many of us know that this work is incredibly taxing. And to be an activist on the front lines takes a lot of mental fortitude, concentration, flexibility, determination, physical strength to continue to go on. And then both in India, Gandhi and movement leaders were able to overthrow British imperialism with the strength of yoga. Women's movements in India advocating for women's rights. And these tenets talk about kindness and showing up for your community, and that personal healing is not done in isolation. It's done alongside your brothers and sisters and people of all different backgrounds. And it's been motivating for me to see queer women of color leading these conversations in the West, because I think a lot of times that's lost. A lot of yoga has become very westernized, whitewashed, appropriated in a lot of wellness spaces, and many view it as simply a flexibility practice of, oh, I'm going to get in a good stretch and go home. Whereas that is very, very small part of what yoga is. Yoga demands us to speak up, to use our voices, to cultivate inner strength and peace so that we can build collective peace and liberation. I have a wonderful teacher named Susanna Barkataki, who I did an advanced training with, an Indian woman who you all can find her work online. She's written 2 books that talks about yoga and liberation and the roots of yoga. And it's just really profound for me to see how people have been able to, yoga teachers have been able to use yogic teachings to show up for causes such as Palestinian liberation right now and create a lot of programming and fundraisers for Gaza. And so I gain a lot of strength for that. And I'm really grateful for the teachings of yoga during a time that it's needed so much.
I just think it's really beautiful how you intertwine the individual and collective side of healing. And it is so important, like how you when I asked you that question earlier, you identified that you not only got healing out of these spaces, but also that you built community around them. And so you have access to community to support you in your individual journey. But now what you're touching on is the other side of that, which is how that individual healing journey impacts the collective, and how our work with collective justice and collective movement work is associated with our individual healing, which is such a beautiful intertwining. On a practical level, I know you kind of just started touching on it, that you're part of the Milwaukee Wellness for Palestine collective. Can you tell us about that project and where you're at now and kind of how it started and all of those things that you want to share about that?
Sure. So last May 2024, I put out a call on my Instagram page to see if wellness practitioners around the city of Milwaukee wanted to come together to talk about what's happening in Gaza. I opened it more as a conversation of let's connect, let's talk about how we can be more vocal and upfront, because I hadn't seen a single person within the wellness field speak about it. And I was hitting my tipping point. I was feeling a lot of dark, heavy energy at home as a Iranian woman. It just felt like a very important, I felt a sense of responsibility if I need to speak up and take crucial steps to do something about what was happening around the genocide. And so I was able to bring people together. And from there, it's just been beautiful to see how much it's just flourished. We have amazing wellness practitioners in Milwaukee. We're so lucky, from herbalists to yoga teachers, Reiki masters, grief doulas, sound practitioners, social workers, therapists, where we've come together. We hosted a larger event last August that was really beautiful. We raised for the Palestinian Children's Relief Fund. It's a national organization, however, they have a wonderful Milwaukee chapter, and the Milwaukee chapter president was able to come and speak with our group, share about the medical food services that they've been able to provide on the ground in Gaza. We've maintained a relationship with them for the past year. And from there, that was the catalyst of us developing a leadership team, creating a way for other wellness practitioners to get involved. So if anybody's interested in our collective, they can go on our Instagram page, MK Wellness for Pally. In our link tree, there is a form that someone can fill out and indicate the level of commitment they want to give. It can be a one-time support thing or a long-term support. And what that looks like now in 2025 is that every month we host small group, up to 10 people usually, intimate spaces where we provide a free wellness offering. However, we ask for donations, and the donations go to a selected organization that is providing support in Gaza or supporting refugee relief work here in our city. And it's been really amazing. We've had people of all different backgrounds come together for those monthly gatherings. A lot of it is centered around processing grief, around connecting with ourselves, with nature, with a lot of different tools that some of us may be being introduced to for the very first time. And it's a way for people to feel resilient collectively rather than us isolating and feeling angry in our own homes and feeling helpless, which I think these systems bet on us feeling that way. I'm feeling disconnected and weak and powerless, but that's not the case at all. There's so much power in collectively coming together, and it's been really beautiful in our group. Our group members are so skilled. I'm so impressed by them every day, and so it's been really fun to have that space, and just even as leaders for us to have a group chat of when we're struggling and grieving, we're able to share that out with people. When Israel had attacked Iran and my family home was being attacked and my family members had to evacuate, that was really hard. June was really hard for me, and my group held me so well. And so I'm really grateful in the ways that we can continue to show up for each other even when we're all struggling.
What a beautiful collective. And I think it's just such a beautiful example of like who you are as like a being, as a soul, like coming together to bring collectives of people together that center healing and center justice. So it just seems like such a beautiful like extension of your work in the world. And I just love how collaborative and community centered you are, Parisa. It really is so beautiful to witness. So thank you for sharing more about that project with us. And we will definitely put the links in the show notes and encourage our listeners to follow. And if you feel called to get involved, please take a look at that volunteer form. So now I feel like we've talked a lot so much about like a little bit about your past and a little bit about, quite a bit about the present. So I'm curious now, like your work as a healing guide and practitioner, doing yoga and Reiki and sound baths. How is your role as a guide and a teacher evolving, and what are some of your dreams for the future?
I think that I'm in a very pivotal moment of things transitioning for me. I have seen a need for more teachers in our city to have trauma-informed trainings and to show up intentionally for their students in ways that makes them feel held. We have wonderful teachers in our city, and also our city is lacking proper trauma training. I've done all my trainings virtually that I'm really grateful that I've had the access to. And I also recognize that it can be really powerful to do a training in person with other people. And so I'm really grateful that last month I had the chance to start training other teachers. So I just started this journey. I've taught 2 cohorts of sound healing practitioners so far that I'm really grateful for. And I'm in the process of creating curriculum around trauma-informed restorative yoga trainings that I hope to roll out later this year. And so I'm excited to go back into the roots of like teaching in that way. I was in higher ed for years and got to create a lot of programs and teach young people around nonviolent peacemaking. I used to work within a peace center, and it's fun for me to be able to now create curriculum and share it with teachers and like get nerdy around things and do research and read together. And so I'm really looking forward to that element, and I hope that that will be catalyst for more teachers to go out and do this work so that we can share this more widely. I have no intention of like being the sole practitioner that does this work in the city and like isolating, like gatekeeping that information. I think it's so important for us as teachers to support one another and uplift one another so that we can support our students, and maybe our students will get uplifted to do this work too and become teachers themselves, especially people of color. We need more teachers of color in the city, specifically Spanish speaking teachers. I think that there's a huge need for that. And a lot of times there aren't programs that feel safe for a lot of people of color to learn and to ask questions. I did my advanced teacher training program virtually because there wasn't a single program in the city that was run by queer women of color. And I really wanted to be led by queer women of color. So I spent 300 hours studying with like 5 different queer women of color teachers virtually who come from all around the US. Oh my gosh, I learned so much. And I felt so safe. And every single person in my cohort was a woman of color. And so it just felt like incredibly freeing to be able to openly talk about the things that I needed to talk about that I don't get to in person in the Milwaukee wellness space. And I hope that I can be somebody who curates that and tries to make things financially as accessible as possible. I created a community fund a few months ago so that people who can't afford my classes are able to tap into this community fund to reduce cost for all my offerings. And so that has felt really aligned with my values. And so as a business owner, I'm trying to figure out how I can sustain myself long term while providing access to people the best that I can.
I would say like values driven is really like what shines through with all of your work, that you are so rooted in your values and like you are someone with such profound integrity and moving in like everything you do from your values with intention. And one thing, a big theme that's been coming out for me as you've been talking is also like the slowness that is required to live in integrity with our values. And I think you are just providing such a beautiful example for our community in Milwaukee and beyond, that like we can undo capitalism and hustle and grind culture by embodying new ways of being, by taking things slow and rooting into our values and going at the pace that we need to keep that integrity. And that's, I feel like, really has come through in this conversation. And it's just really beautiful to have you as like a role model, a teacher, a guide, a community leader, a facilitator doing this. And that's going to ripple out. And I'm so excited for the teacher trainings you'll be doing, that you'll really be able to teach the next, the next cohorts of teachers that can hopefully also be as rooted in their values and integrity as you are. So that's very special. Shall we read Parisa's natal chart? There's so much, like everything you, Parisa, I feel like you live out your chart so beautifully. So I'm excited to share that and get into that. So just give me a moment. I will share the chart.
All right. So I'm going to do a basic overview of what we're seeing in Prisa's chart, and we'll zoom in, talk more, unpack. So for those of you who are not watching, we have a natal chart in front of us. I'm going to sort of like give you a map or visual of it. So the first thing that my eye is drawn to is just the fact that there's a lot of Virgo. I see Sun in Virgo at 4 degrees. We have then Chiron, the rising sign or the ascendant, as well as Mercury also in Virgo. So there's a cluster of Virgo energy, which that checks out in terms of just like, I feel like Virgos, they do struggle with that perfectionist sort of vibe, but I think part of it comes from this desire to constantly hone and to self-improve. Like they're a mutable sign, they're always adaptive. So there's that sort of like I feel like I do see a lot of Virgos in the wellness industry because there's just this curiosity, this desire to like satiate that curiosity. I digress. There's also a beautiful Taurus moon, which, Prisa, I literally have the same moon placement and it's so close to your moon too. So we have that moon at 26 degrees. It's somewhat close to the south node as well. So we're already getting a lot of like earthy signatures, just the sun, moon, rising all being earth signs. Some other placements that stick out to me, a Mars in Cancer, which you share with Emily, which is really interesting to talk about in terms of like community care and feeling really motivated by caring for others, and interest in that sort of caretaking role. And I'm also seeing, ooh, look at that Venus in Libra. So like justice oriented and concerned about inequity and wanting to do something about it. And also like that desire for community as well, I think is really reflective in there too. And Parisa also has some Scorpio action at the bottom part of their chart of her chart. So I'm seeing a Jupiter in Scorpio, somewhat close to a North Node in Scorpio and Pluto there too. So I sort of mapped out the main placements. And Danny or Emily, would y'all like to dive deeper into some of the specific
I
signatures?
definitely do. I have a couple of things. So first of all, this beautiful like sun in Virgo, and then a little while later you have a really lovely Chiron conjunct your rising sign conjunct Mercury. And to me, it kind of tells a bit of a story with Virgo energy. Virgo to me is devotional. It's the earthly container for the divine. So yoga is huge Virgo energy, you know. Anything where we're channeling the spiritual through the physical body is very Virgo energy. And then you have on top of it what Aryn was saying about the curiosity of Virgo energy. The reason is because the ruler of Virgo is Mercury, which is the planet of messages, communication. Merchant is associated with the word Mercury, like, so like any, you know, the transfer of goods here, there, everywhere, but also the Hermetic cross, which is used in medicine, is associated with Hermes or Mercury. So there's something associated with, again, the like analysis of the body, the like mercurial, like being able to put things in order or reorder things or get down to the specifics of something. And so you have that Mercury placement, which it's at home in Virgo and it's with your rising sign. So it's like a huge part of who you are. And then this other character is Chiron, which is also perfect for everything we're talking about because Chiron is the wounded healer. And the whole story of Chiron is that Chiron was pierced with an arrow of his own making because he was both a warrior and a healer, an herbalist and alchemist, and also a warrior, and trained all of the Greek warriors how to be warriors. And so he made these arrows for Hercules, who ended up accidentally piercing him. Well, Chiron was immortal, so he had to learn how to live with this wound that would never go away because it wouldn't kill him, but he couldn't fully heal it. So he gets known as the wounded healer because it has to do with integration, trauma healing, our core wounds, like all of that kind of stuff. And so when someone has a really prominent Chiron placement in their, like on their rising sign like that, especially in Virgo, it's you embodying that archetype, which sound healing, yoga healing, being a teacher like that is very Chiron. Like it's literal embodiment of Chiron energy. So I just think it's a really beautiful placement. And like it also means, especially having those Scorpio, you know, North Node in Scorpio, you've got Pluto there opposing your moon, you've got Jupiter in Scorpio. Those placements are also very like transformative placements, having to do with like a lot of like letting go in order to become something else, shedding of the snake, like the rebirth process and what that looks like. Like you have all of those placements too really strong. So like the lens through which you do this Virgo work that you are obviously quite clearly here to do, like, is through this transformational lens, which, you know, comes with its set of challenges, you know, like you have had to face a lot of things in your ancestry have had to face a lot of things. And then the only other thing I want to say about the Venus in Libra thing, what Emily was saying at the end there about being a values-based person. Venus is totally the planet of values. It's in the second house, which has to do with your stuff, your worth, your value, and it's in Libra at home, which Libra is the scales of justice. It's about fairness. It's about balance. It's about beauty, bringing beauty via fairness and justice and love like that. So yeah, really cool, beautiful chart. And I think all of the things we've talked about really come out here. Emily, what are your thoughts?
Yeah. I also wanted to add how I think in one of our previous episodes, Danny really talks about beauty as justice. Like it's not beauty and justice, it's beauty as justice. And I feel like the work that you do in community, Parisa, is like this beautiful community work that is art, right? That is an art form, bringing people together to offer their creations, to offer their gifts towards the collective, towards our collective liberation, towards Palestinian liberation. Like that is such a beautiful, I think, just example of Venus in Libra as like art and beauty are justice. So, and Danny has really like spoken about that, and it's really resonated with me. I also want to highlight Mercury and Virgo. I love this placement so much, right? Conjoined your 18 degrees Virgo ascendant. And it's a beautiful combination, like Danny already pointed out, that your ascendant is both really conjoined with Chiron, the wounded healer, and Mercury. And to me, Mercury and Virgo, that is the embodiment. If we think about Greco-Roman myth, one role that Hermes or Mercury would play is the psychopomp. And I have been taught, and I really resonate with Mercury and Virgo as the psychopomp. And what the psychopomp means is someone who guides others on underworld journeys. Mercury was called the psychopomp because he was one of the few, if not the only god that could traverse all the realms, the heavens, the earth, and the underworld. And in his psychopomp role, he would guide departed souls on their journey to the underworld so they wouldn't have to go alone. And that like brings up a lot of emotion in me. And I really see that in you, Parisa. Like you are someone that guides others on underworld journeys, on their very deep healing journeys. And I think that's so beautiful. And it's like you do it as a companion. You're not like you're super anti-hierarchy. You're like, I have been through the underworld myself. And I am here to guide you and be your companion and be there as a support because I have been there too. And so I think that Mercury as the psychopomp um, is really like you embody that in your life. Danny, were you going to say something?
No, I just was agreeing with that. And I just think it's a beautiful, because it starts with Chiron. So it's like it goes through the Chiron journey and then your ascendant, you become, and then you become the psychopomp. I just think it's totally very beautiful. So I agree with you, Emily.
Yeah. Your chart makes me emotional, Prisa. And I remember 2 years ago, I read Prisa's chart for the first time, and I had like an emotional reaction before I really even met you. But just sitting with your chart, there's so much beauty in your chart. There's a lot of emotion. There's a lot like you have. One thing I wanted to point out is this mess in the middle here, if anyone's really confused by what all these lines are. These are what the aspects, which are the relationships between the planets. And Parisa's chart is full of trines. That's these triangles. And trines are easy flowing. We get trines between zodiac signs of the same element. And the two elements that are most predominant in her chart are earth and water. And so we have all these beautiful flowing earth and water trines. So the moon, like in a trine with the ascendant and Mercury, who's in a trine with these outer planets, these more generational planets of Uranus and Neptune. So it's just, you have this earth trine, and then you also have this beautiful grand water trine with which is like even tighter. It's even in a closer orb, is what we would say in astrology. Like the planets are, their degrees are closer to one another. You have this Jupiter and Scorpio at 9 degrees in a very exact trine to Saturn and Pisces at 9 degrees, in a trine to Mars in Cancer at 7 degrees. And that stood out to me so much the first time I read your chart. This water trine. I'm curious, Annie, combined your names. Mercury is so retrograde right now. Aryn or Dani, I'm curious what comes up for the two of you when you see that water trine.
Well, one, trines are, effortless connections. It's sort of like, I kind of think of trines of like, when you meet someone and there's just so, like, they have so much in common, you're so aligned with them, where like the relationship is able to develop exponentially because there's like things that you just don't even need to communicate. That's sort of how I visualize trines. So these planets are having these relationships with each other. And also, when you were speaking, Emily, I was really thinking about, like, Saturn is also making some challenging positions. So I'm seeing Saturn oppose the sun with a 5 degree orb. Saturn's not quite opposing like the ascendant, but you have sort of like a Saturn Sun opposition. Parisa, when you were talking about your journey and like how part of like how you came to healing, being a healing practitioner, is you yourself went through something very difficult and challenging. And there's something about that Saturn in the seventh house of relationships, like a responsibility to other people, but also you have a responsibility to like taking care of yourself. And so whenever you were talking about that interplay of the individual is collective and the collective is the individual, I really wonder if like, we're out of our Saturn returns now. Saturn's now in Aries. It almost seems like the Milwaukee Wellness for Palestine kind of coincided with part of your Saturn return of like doing something that both helped you and helped others. And that interplay is just so fascinating to me. And I think, you know, because Saturn has so many other connections to planets in your chart, there's this flow of conversation. Sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's maybe a little challenging, but I find that just to be so interesting and inspiring because I also have a Saturn degree pretty close to yours. And so just hearing your journey and your work and like the hard work that you've put into creating something for yourself, but that's bigger for yourself, like a bigger container to welcome in other people. It just feels really cool. And like, I don't want to like downplay the fact that I'm sure that was really challenging and difficult, like it's not easy work by any means. It takes a lot of resilience. And so props to you for like moving through your Saturn return with so much grace and desire to bring people into your circle and your world of healing. And like, that's just really beautiful.
I also like want to emphasize that like when we're talking about trines, I really loved your description, Aryn. I don't think I've ever heard you describe it, but I learned some things myself. I really appreciate that. When I think about trines, I think don't get tricked by the words easy flowing, because easy flowing can be a lot, right? It can be like expansion can be really great. And it also can be, challenging. And you have Jupiter, who is the ruler of a trine, who is the great benefic in Scorpio, which is like a sign, like I said earlier, of death and rebirth, right? And it's in a direct trine to Saturn, which is our, the Saturn's return happens at a time of when we're maturing and when we're taking on responsibility. And so there's very much like a stoicism to Saturn in contrast to Jupiter. And in mythology, they're father and son. And so there's usually this tension sometimes between these planets. So in a free flowing state, there's a heaviness, I would say, that gets added to this, that it's like free flowing of this energy that is really important. There's like important, responsible, like I have something to do in this world. I have a responsibility to create justice, right? I have a responsibility to like be somebody in this world that takes responsibility for others. This is where we get the third part of it. We get Mars in Cancer, who is in the 11th house of our community, our broader world. And Mars in Cancer, as Aryn mentioned when they were going over the beginning part of your chart, Mars in Cancer cares about, driven by nourishment of the people around them and making sure everybody has their basic needs met and all of those kinds of things. So like, to me, what this trine creates, because it's free flowing energy, but these planets are not light-hearted planets. They're all like, I mean, Jupiter can be in the right context, but like really they're big energy planets that are in very close contact with one another in your chart, which is very specific to you individually, which is why astrology is so fascinating, because you can be a Virgo, but you're so different than all the other Virgos. And this is one of those things where this free flowing energy, it's in water energy. So there's an intuitive, like emotionally driven, but also a great sense of responsibility and leadership and being driven to do something about the problems in the world. Again, you're a values driven person, Venus and Libra in the second house. Like, you are somebody who is driven by justice and fairness. Mars in Cancer in the 11th house, like you care about nourishment of everybody. And so this trine to me is like, yes, it's expansive, but it's expansive of these energies of like expanding your sense of responsibility. Like, you have a sense of responsibility that, you know, hope I'm so like, this free flowing energy, I think, can maybe help you meet the right people that can meet that sense of responsibility too and help you hold it, you know? So I don't know. It's really cool. That water trine is really cool and can be a little heavy too, you know, as Aryn was saying, like it's not all flowers. It can be a challenging thing to hold, to have that level of responsibility. But also with a free flowing energy can totally help you out too by giving you the people in your community that can help you.
Parisa, I'm curious what is coming up for you as we're sharing all this about your chart.
I'm just really grateful that I have three people who are so skilled and passionate about this, sharing all this knowledge with me. And this all feels really resonant to how I have moved through the past 3 years in particular. And as someone who is reflecting a lot on next steps in my life and how I want to continue to show up for people and conserve my energy too. I'm trying to maintain a healthy work-life balance because I've burnt out in the past. I'm someone who gets incredibly passionate about things and I work really, really hard and then I resort to burning out. So I really grateful that you all are sharing this with me so that I have space to reflect more on how do I want to intentionally take next steps so that I can continue to show up for my community because it's just so needed right now. And taking care of myself is a crucial part of me being able to show up.
Yay, thank you for sharing that. I really want to point out your Mars in Cancer because that's a placement that we both share. And that's a placement that I've personally been doing a lot of deep connecting with. And I think Mars and Cancer, Mars is our energy, right? Like that spark of passion that drives us to accomplish something, that motivates us to go after something that we want to create, that we want to do. It's that willpower. And Mars in Cancer, the sign of the moon, ruled by the moon, there's a very cyclical nature to that energy. And I think you're very much in tune with like your rhythms, or you're learning your rhythms, like you just named, like you've noticed you get really passionate about something. What I've learned with Mars and Cancer is like there has to be like an emotional investment. And once you have that emotional investment in something, that Mars is revved up and ready to go. But if there's not an emotional connection, if there's not emotional passion, it's not gonna feel resonant. It's not gonna feel aligned, and that drive is not gonna be as powerful. And because like if there is just like an emotional flooding, or it's something you love wholeheartedly, right? Like that Mars can just go and go. And I always like to look to the moon and the cycles of the moon, right? Because your Mars is ruled by the moon, and the moon is always waxing and waning. And so how do you honor the need of your Mars and that energy to wax and wane? So that's something that I've been doing a lot of deep reflecting on with Mars and Cancer as well. And it seems just, again, so many earth and water signatures in your chart. And then the last thing we were talking about, this Saturn Sun opposition, and it just made me recall something you said about why community agency is so important to you. Because, and I think this can be this struggle when you were younger and growing up, whatever experiences you may have had, where you said community agency is so important for you because you didn't maybe have agency, like you were maybe raised or conditioned, right? Because it's also part of like societal conditioning, right? Like our caregivers certainly play a role. And I also really like to view like how our caregivers raised us really through the lens of cultural conditioning, but like raised to not like to show up how others wanted you to show up, right? That feels very like there's some type of authority over you telling you how to be, telling you how to show up in the world, and like you have to shrink yourself and box yourself in to fit within those boxes, and you show up just like however the authority figure is telling you to. So that felt very Sun opposing Saturn. And now that you've broken through that and you're healing that, now it's like I think of Saturn in the seventh house. I also have Saturn in the seventh house, is like a deep devotion to like right relationship. And like, what does right relationship mean to us? What does it mean to show up in reciprocity, in boundaried right relationship, respecting people's autonomy, respecting people's boundaries? I feel like that's very much a signature of Saturn in the seventh house. So
Parisa, is there anything else that you would like to share with our listeners?
I am grateful to be able to share my story today. And I think that these past few months, I've been trying to advocate to my students to also use their voices in ways that feels affirming for them. So me sharing my story has been really helpful for me today. And I hope that my students and the people who are watching this can also find steps of using their voice, whether that's through singing, vocal tuning on their own or in collective community, sharing their own story with somebody. I think that's just really powerful. I think that talking through things and humming and connecting to our biggest nerve is really needed right now and is a part of that collective healing. I, for the last few months, have been bringing in a lot of chanting into my classes. So, my sound experiences, I have everybody come together and we chant together at the end of classes. Yoga classes are the same way. And that's been really powerful. A lot of students have shared, like, that feels really scary, but doing it together feels less scary. So, that's been really fun. So, I hope that we can all continue to share and tap into and build this inner confidence of that we are worthy to take up space through our voices.
I love that. Thank you so much, Teresa, for sharing your story and for being so open as well with us. Where can our listeners connect with you and support your work?
Yeah, I have a website called parisayogashalla.com. People are able to learn more about my offerings through that website. You're more than welcome to email or text me as well. That's on the bottom of my website. I will continue to provide wellness offerings through Milwaukee Wellness for Palestine as well. If people have questions about that, feel free to DM us on Instagram and we'll get back to you.
yay. Thank you, Parisa. We will link everything in the show notes and encourage our listeners to dive deeper with all of your beautiful offerings. So thank you so much for sharing your story with us. Thank you so much for all the beautiful healing liberatory work that you do in this world. And thank you to our listeners for tuning in. Until next time. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Soul Connections. To support the show, please share this episode with a friend and give us a 5-star review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts.
This podcast is an act of community co-creation with artwork designed by Bree Legan and original music written, produced, and performed by Sofia Mock, Queen Bonobo, Liv LaFluv, and Danielle Renee.
To connect with us or a guest, visit the links in the show notes. Until next time.